I'm Ava Moreno, and I still remember the click of the office door behind me like it was the trigger of a gun. It was a Friday morning, the kind that should have ended with happy hour drinks and weekend plans, not with the death of a 5-year career. Carl sat at the head of the conference table, his posture too relaxed for what was about to happen. Beside him, Gina from HR offered me the tight smile of someone who knew exactly how badly this was going to hurt. "We appreciate everything you've done for the company," Carl began, the words hollow and rehearsed. But due to internal restructuring, I didn't hear the rest. My gaze had drifted to the glass wall outside the conference room. Jared, his nephew, 26, smug, and freshly graduated from a design program I'd helped vet for interns, he was standing outside my office, smiling like he'd already picked out where he'd put his espresso machine. They didn't even bother to change the nameplate yet. Carl's voice faded in and out, each word a dull thud against my chest. "Severance package, effective immediately." He slid a folder across the table. I didn't reach for it. "You're replacing me with him," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Your nephew." Carl blinked like I'd accused him of something inappropriate at a dinner party. "It's not personal, Ava. Jared brings a fresh perspective. We're moving in a new direction." A fresh perspective? Cute way of saying nepotism wrapped in ambition. I stood slowly, deliberately. Gina flinched like she expected me to flip the table. I didn't. I just leaned over and said, "You're going to regret this." Carl's smile faltered. By the time I returned to my office, Jared had already wheeled in a standing desk. My inbox was locked, my files inaccessible. 5 years of client relationships, pitch decks, campaign data, all of it, cut off like I'd never existed. I walked out of that building with nothing but my purse and a hollow space where my career used to live. In the parking garage, I sat in my car for what felt like hours. The concrete pillars blurred through tears I didn't remember allowing. I'd built that department. Me. When Carl panicked during Q3 3 years ago, who pulled a miracle out of a cosmetics launch that shouldn't have worked? When the team threatened to walk over budget cuts, who stayed late for 2 weeks straight, smoothing everything over? Who made the clients feel heard, seen, understood? I screamed into the steering wheel, fists clenched until my knuckles turned white. And then I did what I always do. I got quiet. I got still. I got smart. That night, I found the old leather-bound notebook I'd buried in my closet behind college yearbooks and a dusty pair of heels I hadn't worn since my last promotion. Ether Studio. My dream. My rules. No boys' club, no political maneuvering, no Carl breathing down my neck. Just design. Pure, bold, unapologetic design. And for the first time since that humiliating morning, I felt something other than grief. I felt clarity. That man stole my job. But I was about to steal everything else. 5 years? 5 years of birthdays spent in hotel rooms prepping for client pitches, of missed holidays because a launch date got moved up, of making Carl Brewster look like a genius in boardrooms where I was never even introduced. That kind of loyalty isn't in job descriptions. It's the unspoken currency of ambition, quiet sacrifice in exchange for the promise of legacy. I gave him everything. The Monday after the firing, I didn't sleep in. I couldn't. My body was still wired to the rhythm of early meetings and client check-ins. I sat at my kitchen counter, drinking coffee that tasted like ash, staring at the beige envelope I'd brought home from HR. Termination agreement. Like we were breaking up after a summer fling, not tearing down half a decade of blood, sweat, and beautiful campaigns. I flipped through the pages. Severance, 3 months. Health coverage until the end of the quarter. A non-compete clause so broad it might as well have said, "Don't even think about breathing near another agency." My phone buzzed. A message from my best friend Layla. "He replaced you with a frat boy in Gucci sneakers. I hope his clients eat him alive." I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I pulled up a folder on my laptop titled, "If I Ever Leave." I'd started it 3 years ago, late one night after Carl blamed me for a failed pitch he rewrote without telling me. Inside were scribbled brand ideas, a list of dream clients, and sketches for a logo, Ether Studio. Back then, it had felt like a fantasy, a plan Z for a someday that would probably never come. Now, it stared back at me like prophecy. Carl wasn't always a monster. In the beginning, he was the mentor who spotted me at a design conference and offered a shot at real agency work. He gave me my first big account, sat beside me in meetings, toasted my early wins with overpriced whiskey. I thought we were building something together. But power reveals. And over the years, I watched him change. The more I excelled, the less he smiled. The better my numbers got, the more he talked over me in meetings. When clients asked for me by name, he started booking Jared to shadow me. Succession planning? He'd joke. You won't always want to be the golden goose. I'd laugh, but it always sat wrong, like I was building a throne for someone else. Now it made sense. Jared wasn't shadowing me, he was studying for the takeover. I looked around my apartment, every piece of furniture chosen to reflect calm, success, stability. But it all felt off now, like set pieces in a story that no longer belonged to me. They thought they'd cut me loose. What they really did was cut the rope holding me back. I opened a new document. Ether Studio, Mission, Vision, Core Values. I typed for hours, pouring every resentment and dream into something solid, something that could stand on its own. Loyalty didn't protect me. This time, I'd build something that would. I didn't cry until the second Tuesday. The first one was a blur phone calls to unemployment, blank stares at half-filled LinkedIn forms, and a refusal to let myself feel anything that might slow me down. But on the second Tuesday, I woke up before sunrise, my apartment eerily silent, and it hit me. I had nowhere to be. No one expecting me. No team waiting for updates. No clients needing reassurance. No job. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by business books and outdated branding manuals I hadn't touched in years, and let it happen. The hot, quiet kind of crying that comes with humiliation. Not just because of the firing, but because I hadn't seen it coming. Not really. I'd known Carl was petty. I hadn't known he was capable of betrayal with a smile. But the crying didn't last long. Because beneath the grief, there was something else. A flicker. A memory. That name again. Ether Studio. I went to my closet and pulled out the leather-bound notebook again, this time with reverence. It wasn't just sketches and client lists. It was a blueprint for everything I'd wanted but was too scared to chase. On the first page, written in bold black ink, "Design without compromise." That's what it had always been about. The clean campaigns Carl had dismissed as too conceptual. The women-led brands I'd been told were too niche. The voice I kept softening in meetings so I wouldn't get labeled difficult. All of it, compromised. Bit by bit, year after year, not anymore. I flipped through the pages, revisiting the layout for a studio space I'd imagined with skylights and concrete floors, reading through the list of vendors I'd once admired but never contacted. The ideas felt raw, but not impossible. I opened my laptop and drafted a business plan. Just a skeleton, but it was enough to feel the rush again. I Googled affordable studio spaces in downtown LA and bookmarked 3 with good light and bad parking. I texted Layla, "If I actually did this, would you join me?" Her response came within a minute. "Tell me when and where." "I've got client contacts who hate Carl more than you do." I smiled for the first time in days. It wasn't just about building something new. It was about making sure I was never disposable again. Carl had taken my title, he'd taken my office. He'd handed everything I built to a blood relative who'd never pulled a 14-hour day in his life. But he hadn't taken my vision. He couldn't. That night, I posted to LinkedIn. When one chapter ends, another begins. Stay tuned. Something beautiful is coming. It got 72 likes and a dozen messages from old clients asking if I was available for freelance. Ether wasn't real yet, but in my mind, it already had a front door. And behind it, everything they thought they'd taken from me. I should have known Carl wouldn't let me go quietly. At first, it was just silence. Former coworkers stopped replying to my texts. People who used to crowd my desk for feedback suddenly acted like I'd vanished. I told myself it was awkwardness. Maybe they didn't know what to say. But then, words started getting back to me in fragments, whispered through the grapevine of agency gossip. She was let go for insubordination. She didn't take feedback well. Carl wasn't content with taking my job. He needed to poison the air around me, make it unbreathable so I couldn't survive in it anymore. I reached out to one of our favorite clients, a luxury skincare brand I'd personally brought into the agency 2 years ago. I'd built their rebrand from scratch, walked them through color psychology and tone development, sat in every late-night product shoot like it was my own launch. I called their CMO, Marissa. No answer. I emailed. Bounced back. I tried her assistant. Nothing. 2 days later, Layla forwarded me an internal agency memo that someone had leaked anonymously. The subject line hit me like a punch. Notice, Ava Moreno, no longer with the firm. The body of the message read like a breakup letter drafted by a lawyer, calm, professional, and completely devoid of truth. It mentioned creative differences, misalignment with leadership, and a need to restructure for long-term growth. I stared at it for a long time, fingers trembling above the keys. This wasn't just about cutting ties. This was scorched earth. By Friday, 2 recruiters had canceled scheduled calls. One cited a mismatch in professional temperament. The other ghosted me completely. I sat at my tiny dining table, eyes burning, wondering how I'd gone from rising star to radioactive in less than 2 weeks. That's when I got the call. Layla. Her voice low, almost cautious. He's poisoning the well, Ava. I had drinks with Nate from PR. Carl told him you had an outburst in your exit meeting. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. An outburst? I didn't even raise my voice. He said you threw a chair. He what? She paused. He's scared of what you might do next, so he's getting ahead of it. Getting ahead of it. Carl knew I had the relationships, the trust, the history with clients. He couldn't control what I'd built with them, so he did the next best thing. He tried to erase it. I closed my laptop. My hands were cold, my chest was tight, so this was war. He wanted me out of the industry. Blacklisted. Forgotten. He didn't realize that I wasn't trying to get back in. I was building the next thing. Something he couldn't touch, couldn't spin, couldn't buy. Ether Studio wasn't just going to be my comeback. It was going to be the reckoning. I almost missed the email. It was sandwiched between a spammy newsletter and a polite rejection from a recruiter who admired my passion but had already filled the role. At first glance, it looked like another ghost client circling the drain of my past. But then I saw the sender's name. Isabel Tran, CMO of Delphine Skincare. Subject, we heard what happened. My stomach dropped. Delphine had been one of my biggest wins. 2 years ago, they were a boutique brand with a cult following and no clear identity. I gave them one. Elegant packaging, a voice that whispered luxury without arrogance, campaigns that made beauty feel intimate. Our launch tripled their market share in less than a year. I clicked the message. Ava, we'd been following the news around your departure. None of it sits right with us. Can we talk? Discreetly. That was it. No fluff. No apologies. Just the exact kind of door I'd been staring at for weeks, waiting for it to crack open. We met at a small cafe in Silver Lake, the kind of place with overpriced matcha and indoor plants that had their own Instagram handles. Isabel arrived exactly on time, sunglasses still on, lips pressed tight like she didn't trust herself to smile. First, she said, sliding into the booth, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve what happened. I shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. It's the game, right? You play long enough, someone else writes the rules. Except you were the reason we stayed at that agency, she said. Your vision, your leadership. Not Carl, certainly not that smug nephew he hired to replace you. Jared. Of course she'd heard. Isabel leaned in, her voice quieter now. Here's the deal, we're not happy. The last pitch we got felt like it came out of a college assignment. No edge, no soul, just buzzwords and borrowed aesthetics. That sounds familiar? She smirked, but her tone turned serious. If you go independent, we're with you. I blinked. What? You heard me. We've been looking for a reason to leave. We didn't out of loyalty to you, not the agency. You start something? Anything. We'll be your first client. Quietly, if you need, we'll find a way. I stared at her across the table, the weight of what she was offering crashing down on me like a wave. Ether wasn't real yet. It had no space, no staff, no legal entity. Just a name in a notebook and a fire in my chest. And here she was, handing me the match to light it all. I reached for my drink, my hand steadier than I expected. Give me 2 weeks, I said. Take one, she replied. We're not waiting forever. When we stood to leave, she placed a hand on my arm. They tried to erase you, she said. But they forgot. We saw who actually did the work. Outside, the sun hit my face, and for the first time since I walked out of that conference room, I felt it. Power. Not borrowed. Not given. Mine. It started with the pile of unopened mail on my kitchen counter, credit card statements, a health insurance, COBRA packet, a past due notice from my internet provider that I hadn't even realized was late. I stood there staring at it all, barefoot in a robe, the morning light making every harsh word on the page feel louder. This was the part no one tells you about chasing your dream. The fear that shows up when the world goes quiet. I had one, maybe. Client, a notebook full of vision, and a checking account that was bleeding. The severance would only stretch so far. Rent was due next week, my car insurance the week after that, and yet I couldn't bring myself to apply for another job, not after what Carl did. Not when I knew every job offer would come with questions I wasn't ready to answer. Why did you leave Brewster & Co? What happened with your exit? Would your previous employer recommend you? No. No to all of it. I curled up on the couch, clutching my laptop like a life raft, scrolling through old emails I'd sent myself in better times. Design inspiration, quotes from clients. A selfie I'd taken with my team after landing the D'Argent campaign, all of us grinning like we'd just won the lottery. That was the girl Carl fired, the one who built something out of nothing. I missed her. My phone buzzed. Layla again. How are you holding up? I stared at the message, trying to come up with something that didn't sound pathetic. But before I could type anything, she followed up. You built that firm's reputation. You are the brand, Ava. Don't forget that. I dropped the phone in my lap, something sharp pressing behind my ribs. Not sadness this time, something else. Fury. Not the flailing, destructive kind. The cold, clear kind that burns steady and forces you to move. She was right. I was the brand. Every client win, every award, every record-setting campaign. I wasn't lucky, I was good. And Carl knew it. That's why he worked so hard to erase me. I stood up, my mind already racing. I couldn't afford to doubt myself anymore. Delphine Skincare was waiting. That wasn't a lifeline, it was a fuse. I walked to my closet and pulled out a navy blazer I hadn't touched in months. It still smelled like ambition, like late nights and early mornings and champagne in plastic cups. I put it on, barefoot, hair a mess, bills still waiting on the counter, and looked at myself in the mirror. Not broken, not defeated, ready. If I wanted this dream to breathe, I had to risk everything to make it real. One client, one space, one chance to never be disposable again. The building didn't look like much. It was a squat, converted warehouse just off Melrose, the kind of place you drove past 100 times without noticing. The paint was chipped, the windows needed a good cleaning, and the lobby smelled vaguely like old coffee and dreams that hadn't quite made it. But it had light. Real, golden, late afternoon light that poured through tall windows and stretched across concrete floors like it belonged there. I stood in the middle of the empty studio space, listening to the hum of possibility. It wasn't big. There was a water stain on the ceiling, and the fuse box looked like it hadn't been updated since the Reagan era. But I saw it. The long tables lined with fabric swatches, the mood boards pinned to walls. The plants I'd probably forget to water but love anyway. The hum of creativity crackling under everything like static. This was Ether Studio. It wasn't a dream anymore. I signed the lease on a Tuesday, hands shaking only slightly. The landlord didn't ask what I did, just slid the papers across the table like he'd seen this kind of gamble before and was rooting for me in his own quiet way. That night, I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor with a bottle of Trader Joe's Prosecco and a single folding chair. I didn't even have Wi-Fi yet, but I had power. Literally and figuratively. I charged my laptop and pulled up LinkedIn. And then, I posted. After 5 incredible years helping brands define themselves, I'm finally doing the same for myself. Ether Studio is coming, design without compromise. If you know, you know. It wasn't a pitch. It was a signal. Within an hour, the likes started trickling in. Former coworkers, industry friends, a few clients who I hadn't heard from since the fallout. And then came the messages. Tell me more. Are you taking on new projects? Ava, is this what I think it is? I smiled, each notification like a small fire catching light. The next morning, Layla showed up with coffee and a giant roll of butcher paper. If this is really happening, she said, we're making a war board. We spent hours sketching out our strategy, brand values, dream clients, names of people who'd quietly whispered support but couldn't say so publicly yet. Every piece felt like a rebellion. Every scribble was a step further away from Carl and everything he thought he took from me. By sunset, the walls were alive with color and chaos and plans. It wasn't just a studio anymore, it was a declaration. Ether was here, and we were just getting started. It started with a single phone call. Hey Ava, you didn't hear it from me, but Jared just tanked a pitch. Bad. It was Milo, one of the junior copywriters I used to mentor, the kind of talent Carl never really noticed until after I'd shaped them into something valuable. His voice was low, half thrilled, half terrified. Delphine asked for concept options. Jared showed them, a mood board, just a mood board, no messaging, no rollout strategy. They walked out 10 minutes in. I almost dropped my coffee. 3 hours later, an email popped up in the ether inbox. Not from Delphine, no, they were too discreet for that, but from another name I knew well. Sylvie Chang, creative director at Leon and Wild. Luxury jewelry, intense art direction, the kind of brand Carl had always begged to pitch. Ava, are you available to consult? Carl's team isn't listening and we miss your vision. Quietly, of course. Quietly. Always quietly at first. But the messages kept coming. One from a fitness apparel startup I helped rebrand 2 years ago. Another from an eco-beauty line that had followed my work since my freelance days. All of them polite, cautious, strategic. Not loving the new direction. Would love your input. Can we grab coffee? Jared wasn't just struggling, he was imploding. Word had gotten out that his fresh perspective was just recycled. Pinterest aesthetics and buzzwords he barely understood. Clients could smell insecurity, and Jared reeked of it. He didn't know how to hold a room. He didn't know how to problem solve on his feet, and most importantly, he didn't know how to listen. Carl was scrambling. I heard he started showing up in pitch meetings again, trying to calm nerves and charm his way through rising panic. But charm doesn't land the plane. Work does. And Carl hadn't done the work in years. Meanwhile, my calendar was filling up. 2 clients officially signed contracts by Friday. 3 more sent NDAs. Ether Studio was suddenly, undeniably, alive. Layla and I upgraded from folding chairs to real desks, and every time a new contract came in, we wrote the name on the butcher paper wall in bold red ink. It felt illicit. It felt electric. It felt like revenge. But it wasn't personal, not really, it was business. And Carl had bet on bloodlines over talent. Now he was bleeding clients one by one. The Design Expo was our Super Bowl. Every year, the top agencies rolled out their most dazzling work. Full sensory installations, live product demos, even celebrity endorsements if you had the budget for it. Carl had always treated it like a coronation. We'd spend weeks rehearsing his speech, fine-tuning our booth, making sure his name was stamped on everything, even if the actual work had come from me and my team. But this year, I was on my own. Not just invited, but headlining a panel on authentic brand evolution. Someone must have leaked the guest list because 3 days before the event, I got a text from Layla. Guess who's across the aisle from us on the floor map? Brewster & Co., booth 117. Ether Studio, booth 118. You couldn't write it better if you tried. The morning of the expo, I wore all black. Not for mourning, more like war paint. The Ether booth was simple but stunning. Natural textures, soft lighting, our name etched into the wood behind us like it belonged there. No gimmicks, just quiet power. By 10:00 a.m., we had a line. Design students, brand reps, reporters. They came for the aesthetic, stayed for the story. The whispers were everywhere. That's Ava Moreno. She's the one Carl fired, right? I heard her whole team followed her out. That skincare brand? Yeah, she landed them solo. Carl's booth, just 20 feet away, looked like a sad throwback to 2017. Neon. Loud music. A rotating slideshow on a screen that glitched every 10 minutes. Jared stood at the edge, trying to give out branded tote bags. No one stopped. At noon, I took the stage for my panel. The room was packed, standing room only. I could see Carl from the corner of my eye, arms crossed, jaw clenched. I didn't look at him again. Instead, I told the truth. About creative ownership. About women being erased from their own work. About what it means to build something for yourself, not for the approval of men who see you as a stepping stone. Every word landed like a match striking against dry wood. And then came the TikTok. Someone filmed a side-by-side walkthrough of both booths. Mine, clean, full, vibrant. Carl's, empty, awkward, overdesigned. The video went viral within hours. By the next morning, it had over 1.2 million views. Caption, David vs. Goliath, Design Edition. Comments flooded in. This is what happens when you fire the visionary and promote the intern. Carl who? I didn't smile. Not then, not yet. But I felt something inside me settle. Not revenge. Validation. The call came on a Thursday morning. I was sitting in the new Ether conference room. Okay, it was really just the corner of the studio with a rug and a borrowed coffee table. But it was ours. The sunlight was pouring through the high windows. Layla was across from me reviewing a new packaging mock-up, and my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in over a year. It was Gregory Lant, investor, board member. The man who wrote the first check that kept Carl's agency afloat back when we lost the Luminex account. He never called me. He barely even looked at me when we were in the same room. But this time, he called me and left a voicemail. Ava, call me back. We need to talk about what's going on at Brewster & Co. I froze. Layla raised an eyebrow. Everything okay? I pressed play again, letting her listen. Her grin spread slowly. Oh, he's sweating. I called him back. Gregory answered on the first ring. Ava, thank you. Listen, I know things ended poorly, but I need your insight. Straight to business. No apology. Classic. He launched into it. Clients were leaving in clusters. The Delphine account was officially gone. Leon and Wild had ghosted Carl. One investor had already pulled out after the viral expo video. Internal morale was collapsing. Apparently, Jared had lost another pitch, this time to a junior agency with a staff of 4. And Carl? He keeps insisting everything's under control, Gregory said. But you and I both know it never was. There it was. The truth they all whispered but never said aloud. That I had been the engine. That Carl had always needed someone like me to hide behind. What do you need from me? I asked, voice even. I need to understand what went wrong, and more importantly, what you're building. A pause. I've heard the whispers. Ether Studio, the client list, the buzz. Some of our portfolio companies are watching closely. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. He wasn't just probing for gossip, he was fishing for alignment. But I wasn't interested in becoming anyone's cleanup crew. I'm not coming back, I said calmly, not to fix his mistakes, not to patch your investment. I figured as much. A rustle of paper. But if there's ever a conversation about partnership, future capital, I'd rather be part of the solution this time. Translation, we backed the wrong horse. I ended the call with a professional smile in my voice. Thanks for reaching out, Gregory. I'll keep that in mind. When I hung up, Layla was already standing. You know what this means, right? I nodded, chest rising with something close to pride. Carl wasn't just losing clients anymore, he was losing his boardroom. And the people who once ignored me? Now they were trying to keep up. It happened quietly. A notice filed with the state. A late-night article buried on page 3 of an industry blog. Brewster & Co. had entered strategic financial restructuring, the kind of PR term that tried to dress bankruptcy in a suit and tie. But we knew what it meant. The empire had fallen. Layla burst into the studio with her phone held high. They're done, she said, eyes wide with disbelief. They're actually done. I took the phone from her, reading the headline 3 times just to make sure it was real. Brewster & Co. Files for bankruptcy, after client exodus, sources, site, total mismanagement. I sat down on the studio's worn leather couch, the one we found on Craigslist for $200, and had to carry up 2 flights of stairs because the freight elevator broke. The same couch where I'd cried after our first failed pitch. The same one where we celebrated our first client win with cheap champagne and leftover cupcakes. Carl's name was nowhere in the article's title, but the quotes made it clear. The firm lost its creative compass. Clients were promised leadership that never showed up. They underestimated the cost of replacing loyalty with family ties. Every word was a nail in the coffin of the company I once gave my life to. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. It didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. There was no music swelling, no montage of my enemies looking shocked and defeated. It was quieter than that. Heavier. Like watching a building you used to live in get demolished, brick by brick, memory by memory. But there was peace in it. Carl had always assumed he was untouchable. He built a fortress out of arrogance, out of legacy and connection and empty charm. But he forgot something vital. Reputation isn't what you say about yourself, it's what other people whisper when you leave the room. And now, they were whispering the truth. By the following week, half his staff had been laid off. Jared's LinkedIn bio quietly changed to seeking new opportunities. Several of my former colleagues reached out, cautiously, like survivors peeking out after a storm. I should have believed you. You were always the heart of that place. I responded to some, not all, not out of pettiness, but because I'd already moved on. Ether was thriving. We signed 2 new contracts that week alone. Our waiting list was 3 months deep. The butcher paper on the wall now stretched across 2 rooms, filled with names, dates, milestones. We needed to order more. Carl didn't call. He wouldn't. That kind of pride doesn't shrink, it calcifies. But I didn't need his apology. He tried to erase me. Instead, he erased himself. The old office building looked smaller than I remembered. I hadn't been back since the day they fired me. 5 years of my life spent pacing those hallways, lighting those conference rooms with late-night strategy sessions, defending client work like it was my own blood, and now it was just quiet. I parked across the street and sat in my car, watching the building like it might still exhale his arrogance. But there were no lights on, no receptionist in the glass lobby. The Brewster & Co. logo had been removed, leaving a faint ghost of adhesive and ego behind. For a moment, I thought about walking in, seeing if anything of mine had survived. An old print mock-up, a forgotten coffee mug, some relic of the woman who'd once believed loyalty was enough. But I didn't move, because there was nothing in that building I needed anymore. The real souvenirs of my time there weren't on shelves. They were in my voice when I pitched now, in the way I asked questions no one else thought to ask. In the quiet fire I carried into every client meeting, every campaign concept, every decision I made at Ether. This wasn't closure, this was clarity. Back at the studio, the mood was electric. We'd just signed our biggest campaign yet, a global launch with a high-end beauty brand I used to dream about working with. They chose Ether over 3 legacy agencies, including one that used to be mine. Layla popped a bottle of champagne the second the paperwork cleared. We poured it into mismatched coffee mugs and toasted like the scrappy creatives we still were underneath all the growth. "To what?" she asked. I raised my glass and smiled. "To design without compromise." Laughter echoed off the concrete walls as the team joined in, the sound full and alive, nothing like the stiff silence of my old office. We were building something different. Not just profitable, powerful, not just sleek, soulful. Ether was more than a studio. It was a mirror for every woman who'd ever been told to stay quiet, to step aside, to be replaceable. And me? I'd finally become the thing they never expected. Untouchable. It started with a single post. I hadn't planned it. I wasn't looking for clicks or sympathy or a second wave of industry gossip. I just woke up one morning, sat on my balcony with coffee and sunlight spilling over my lap, and felt something press against my ribs. Not pain, not rage, something closer to understanding. So I opened my laptop and wrote. They fired me to make room for someone who hadn't earned it. I cried, I doubted, I almost disappeared. But instead, I started over. This is what rebuilding looks like, from a woman who was once told she was replaceable. Then I kept going. I wrote about what it meant to give your loyalty to people who only value control. About waking up after the humiliation of being cast aside and realizing you're still standing. About how often women in business are praised for being strong, but punished the moment they become powerful. I wrote about Ether Studio, not as revenge, not as a comeback, but as a return. To self, to purpose, to vision. It took me 2 hours to shape the words, 1 click to post them. And then everything changed. The blog went viral in 24 hours. Over 600,000 views by the end of the first day. My inbox flooded with messages, not just from clients or designers, but from women in every industry imaginable. Your story is mine. I was let go after maternity leave and told it was just business. They replaced me with someone cheaper, younger, and told me I'd understand. Thank you for saying what I never had the courage to. They weren't just responding, they were seeing themselves in me. In the silence I broke, in the decision to rise instead of disappear. The next week, Forbes reached out. Then Fast Company. Then a podcast I used to listen to religiously on my morning commute asked if I'd speak about creative resilience and leadership. I said yes. Not because I wanted the spotlight, but because I'd finally earned the right to step into it without apology. Layla read the post twice. The second time, she cried. "You didn't just build a business," she said, her voice thick. "You built a blueprint." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't trying to start a movement. But maybe that's how they start, quietly, with truth. With scars turned inside out. Later that month, we held our first team-wide gathering in the new studio space. There were 30 people now. designers, strategists, copywriters, project managers, all handpicked, all aligned with the kind of work we wanted to do. I stood in front of them with a printout of the blog in my hand. "This isn't just my story," I said. "It's yours too. We're the architects of what comes next." They clapped. Some of them cried. One whispered thank you when she passed me in the hallway. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a woman trying to prove her worth. I felt like a leader, because I'd told the truth. And people were finally listening. Barcelona was a whim. It wasn't on my bucket list, not really. I'd never romanticized the idea of Gaudí or tapas or sun-drunk afternoons along the coast. But something about it called to me in a quiet, stubborn voice, like a place you don't understand until you see it with your own eyes. I booked a last-minute flight, no itinerary, no clients, no pressure. Just me, a sketchbook I hadn't touched since college, and the kind of silence that felt like healing instead of absence. The city welcomed me like a secret. Narrow alleyways wound through old neighborhoods that smelled like bread and seawater. Musicians played under balconies spilling with ivy. I wandered without purpose, letting my feet chase the sun. No phone, no meetings, no one needing anything from me. And in that stillness, I found her again. The girl I used to be. Before Carl. Before the climb. Before every win came with a warning not to get too comfortable, too loud, too visible. She walked beside me in the warm breeze, not asking anything of me except to remember who I was when no one was watching. I sat in a small park one morning, sketchbook open on my lap, and just drew. Not a campaign. Not a wireframe, just lines. Shapes. Faces I imagined. Buildings I'd never seen. My hand moved without strategy, without purpose, just instinct. It felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. One afternoon, I took a train to Sitges, a quiet beach town an hour south. I lay on the sand with a bottle of water and a notebook, watching the waves etch temporary artwork into the shore. And for the first time, I let myself ask the question I'd avoided for months. What do I want now? Not the revenge, not the wins, not the proof. Me. Ether was thriving. The world had seen what I could do when left to my own devices. The fire that Carl tried to snuff out had become a lighthouse for others. But underneath the noise, something deeper stirred. A hunger not just to lead, but to evolve. I wanted space to dream again, to create without deadlines, to fail without fallout, to live without constantly being defined by what I'd survived. That night, I sat on my tiny balcony with a glass of red wine and wrote a letter to myself. Just one page, honest, unfiltered, no branding, no strategy. Just the truth. You are not just a survivor, you are a visionary. And for the first time, I believed it. When I boarded the plane home, I wasn't the same woman who left. I carried less weight, fewer doubts, more clarity, and a sketchbook full of wild, imperfect ideas. Barcelona didn't give me answers. It gave me back the question. The website looked familiar, too familiar. I was scrolling through a routine competitor audit, part of my monthly ritual to keep tabs on the design landscape, when I clicked a link that stopped me cold. Muted pastel palette. Wide sans serif font. Photography style that leaned vulnerable but polished. And the tagline? Design without compromise. I blinked. That was mine. Not the exact words, but close enough. And the layout? Nearly identical to the early mock-ups I'd posted 6 months ago. The kind of visual DNA no algorithm could replicate by accident. It didn't take long to find the culprit. Jared. Or rather, Jared Brewster Creative. He'd launched a boutique agency, if you could call 3 pages and a paid press release an agency, and was billing himself as a fresh voice for thoughtful brands. His portfolio was a Frankenstein collage of campaigns he barely contributed to, including mine. He'd even used my old Ether prototype, the one I'd pitched internally before being shut down. I recognized the font choice, the copy rhythms, even a few of my original phrases, clumsily rewritten but unmistakably stolen. I laughed. A short, sharp sound. Not because it was funny, but because it was so inevitable. Layla walked in mid-scroll and froze. "Oh my God, is that?" "Yup." She leaned over, squinting at the screen. He really thought no one would notice? I think he thought no one would care. But they did. By the end of the week, 2 clients reached out asking if I'd seen Jared's site. One sent screenshots. Another forwarded an email invite to his launch event, complete with faux minimalist branding that looked like it had been filtered through my Instagram account. The industry saw it too. A designer I'd mentored DM'd me a side-by-side TikTok comparing Ether's homepage with Jared's. It got 50,000 views in 2 hours. The comments were brutal. Imagine getting fired, stealing her vision, and still failing to make it original. This is giving budget Ava Moreno. We stan the real queen. I didn't need to respond. The work spoke louder than I ever could. Jared's brand wasn't gaining traction. It was becoming a cautionary tale. Clients laughed it off. Peers rolled their eyes. Everyone knew the difference between a blueprint and a forgery. That was the thing Carl never taught him. Vision can't be inherited. It's earned. It's lived. And mine was untouchable. She showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. I was reviewing print proofs in the studio when our intern buzzed my desk. "There's someone here to see you. Says she used to work with you at Brewster." I didn't flinch. I knew before I looked. Maya. The last time I saw her, she was seated in that silent HR room across the hall, typing on her laptop while I packed my things. She hadn't looked up, not even once. She stood in the doorway now, hair different, posture unsure, holding a portfolio too tight against her chest like armor. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see," she said before I could say anything. But I wanted to talk. I nodded toward the table near the front window. "Sit?" She did. For a full minute we said nothing. She looked around, taking in the space, the color, the light, the energy. I saw the realization settle on her face like smoke. This is what she built. She cleared her throat. "I stayed after you left. I told myself it was just business, that it wasn't my fight." I didn't respond. "But it was," she added. "It always was. I just didn't want to lose my job." "That's fair," I said. "You wouldn't have been the first." She let out a bitter laugh. I stayed out of fear. And then I watched what fear built. Nothing. Carl didn't lead. Jared didn't create. I tried to speak up in meetings, and they shut me down every time. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her portfolio. "I've been working on something. On my own. Nights, weekends. I don't want to work in fear anymore. I want to do real work." She slid it across the table. I hesitated. Not because I doubted her, but because I knew what this moment meant. It was more than a portfolio review. It was a decision. About trust. About second chances. I opened the book. It was good. Rough in places, but smart. Experimental. Risky in ways that made my blood buzz. And honest, like someone had finally decided to stop making work for approval and start making it for herself. I closed the book and looked at her. "You burned a bridge," I said softly, "but you didn't blow it up." She blinked. "Does that mean?" "It means everyone deserves one chance to choose better." She stared at me for a moment, stunned, then nodded slowly. "Thank you." "No," I said. "Show me I'm right about you. That's the thank you." She stood, hands still shaking, but taller than when she walked in. As she walked out with her portfolio under one arm and a keycard in the other, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close. Maybe this was what leadership really meant. Not just building something for yourself, but giving others the chance to build better too. It started with a question from our newest hire. She was fresh out of school, portfolio still warm from the printer, and yet something in her voice stopped me. "How did you know when it was time to lead?" We were standing by the kitchenette, waiting for coffee to brew, the kind of mundane moment that somehow opens doors. I looked at her, bright-eyed, nervous, trying not to seem too eager, and something inside me softened. I saw myself. Or rather, the version of me before Carl, before betrayal, before I learned the difference between being good and being powerful. "I didn't know," I said honestly. "I just got tired of following people who didn't deserve it." She nodded, biting her lip like she wanted to say more. So I asked, "What do you want out of this?" She hesitated, then said, "I want to do work that matters. I don't want to just design, I want to mean something." That night, I went home and pulled out my old notebook, the one that started it all. I flipped past the logos, the business plans, the early sketches of Ether's identity, and found the page I'd once labeled Someday. And I wrote, Mentorship Program, Phase 1. I didn't want to create another agency pipeline designed to churn out employees. I wanted something deeper. A space for young creatives to unlearn the fear of being too bold, too emotional, too different. A space where ethics weren't optional, where boundaries were sacred, where success wasn't just about applause, but about alignment. Within a week, we launched Ether Academy small at first, just 3 mentees paired with senior team members. No tuition, no catch, just access, guidance, and the promise of being seen. Applications poured in. One story after another, designers burned by toxic studios, women who were told to shrink their voice, queer creatives who never saw themselves reflected in leadership. Every submission made my chest ache in the best way. They weren't just looking for jobs, they were looking for someone to tell them their instincts were worth something. I made time. Every week. No assistants, no shields, just me and whoever needed me that day. Portfolio reviews, strategy sessions. Hard truths served with gentleness. And something happened. My work changed, not in style, but in purpose. Every project started to feel like part of something bigger. A movement toward not just doing good work, but raising the bar for how work should feel. I wasn't just a founder anymore. I was a mentor, a guide. And for the first time, I understood what legacy really meant. Not just what you build, but who you build it for. The studio was glowing. Not from the lights. We'd always kept those soft, golden, just shy of cinematic, but from the people. Clients in cocktail dresses, team members in half-undone blazers. Friends, mentors, the barista from downstairs who had watched us stumble in bleary-eyed every morning for 2 years. Everyone we'd touched, everyone who'd touched us. It was Ether Studios' anniversary party. 1 year since the first client signed. 1 year since I stood alone in an empty room with a bottle of Prosecco and a folding chair, daring to believe I could build something that would outlast the bitterness. Now the room pulsed with music and warmth, with laughter so full it felt like architecture. Layla raised a glass first. To Ava, she said, voice cracking slightly. For giving us more than a job, for giving us a vision. Everyone turned to me then. I should have had something planned, a speech maybe, some poetic string of words to tie everything together. But all I could do was smile. Because this wasn't about poetry, this was about truth. I lifted my glass. To every person in this room who believed before it was safe to. Who followed something invisible, something impossible. This, I gestured around us. This is what happens when you choose your own voice over someone else's comfort. When you stop waiting for permission. There were tears. Mine, mostly. After the toast, people scattered, some toward the drinks, others toward each other, and I stood quietly, letting it wash over me. Jared was long gone. Brewster & Co. was a headline from last year's failure column. Carl, someone told me, was consulting in Florida, which I assumed meant pretending to still matter. But none of that lived here now. Not in this room. Not in the laughter. Not in the joy. Ava Moreno, replaceable creative director? She was dead. This Ava. This woman standing in a room built from grit, design, and undiluted truth had become something more. Not a comeback. Not revenge. Just a home. A sanctuary. A legacy made from courage and second chances. As I watched the people I loved toast under the soft light, I felt it settle into my bones. I built this, and no one could take it from me again.